Someone get this man out of here, before he causes more embarrassment. Victoria Asford's strident voice echoed through the VIP dining room of Le Bernardin restaurant, causing several heads to turn toward table 7, where a gray-haired gentleman was gesticulating desperately while his face grew increasingly red. Andre Santos, 28 years old, was holding a tray of expensive crystal glasses when he heard the commotion. He had been working there for 2 years, always invisible among Manhattan's elite, serving dishes that cost more than his weekly salary. He never would have imagined that this ordinary Thursday night would become the moment that would change everything. "Dad, please. You're making a scene," Victoria whispered through clenched teeth, clearly mortified, as other customers began to whisper and point. The man, about 65 years old, kept gesticulating frantically with visibly irregular breathing and beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The maitre d', Timothy Richardson, approached the table with his usual aristocratic posture. "Mrs. Asford, perhaps it would be best to call an ambulance. Your father seems to be having some kind of episode." "Episode?" Victoria laughed nervously, her diamonds sparkling under the lamplight. "He's just being dramatic. He's always been like this when he doesn't get what he wants." But Andre observed something different. His trained eyes caught details that others ignored. The man wasn't throwing a tantrum. His hands were moving with specific desperate patterns, sign language, and from the way his lips were twitching and his eyes widening, he was clearly in panic, trying to communicate something urgent. "Excuse me," Andre interrupted softly, setting his tray on the nearby table. Timothy glared at him. "Santos, get back to the kitchen. This is none of your business." "He's having a panic attack," Andre said calmly, ignoring the maitre d', "and he's trying to say he needs his heart medication." Victoria looked at Andre as if he had just spoken in an alien language. "How can you possibly know that?" Without asking permission, Andre approached Mr. Asford and began signing fluently. "Sir, everything is okay. Where is your medication?" The relief on the man's face was instantaneous. His hands trembled as he pointed to his jacket, indicating the medicine was in the inside pocket. Andre quickly retrieved the nitroglycerin bottle and helped the man take the sublingual tablet. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Victoria was speechless. Timothy looked like he had swallowed his own pride, and the other customers watched the scene with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Thank you," Mr. Asford signed to Andre, his hands still trembling but with more controlled movements. "My daughter has never learned. She's always been embarrassed." Andre nodded with understanding and responded, "Don't worry. What's important is that you're safe now." "You really understand my father?" Victoria whispered, her voice laden with an emotion she clearly hadn't expected to feel. Andre looked at her with that serenity that only exists in those who have faced far worse storms and survived to tell the tale. For years he had served these people in silence, being treated like a piece of furniture, listening to condescending comments about how lucky he was to work in such an elegant place. But there, before all those contemptuous gazes that were transforming into curiosity, he stood firm like someone holding a secret too powerful to reveal before its time. If this story of prejudice and overcoming has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover how a simple moment of compassion would become the catalyst for a revolution that no one would ever forget. Victoria looked at Andre with a mixture of confusion and something that seemed almost like shame. "You really communicate with my father better than I do?" she murmured, her voice losing for the first time all evening its aristocratic haughtiness. "How many years has he been deaf?" Andre asked kindly while helping Mr. Asford settle better in his chair. "Since he was 40. A car accident." Victoria looked away. "I tried to learn sign language a few times, but I always had other priorities." Timothy Richardson cleared his throat loudly, clearly annoyed by the scene. "Santos, I think we've done more than enough here. The other customers are waiting." But Andre didn't move. Instead, he continued communicating in sign language with Mr. Asford, who was now smiling and gesticulating animatedly about something related to books and literature. The conversation flowed with a naturalness that made Victoria realize, with a knot in her chest, how much time she had wasted not really knowing her own father. "Where did you learn that?" Victoria insisted, ignoring the maitre d's disapproving look. Andre hesitated for a moment. "My younger sister was born deaf. I learned when I was a child." "Your sister," Victoria repeated, as if processing the idea that this man she saw serving wine every week had a family, a history, a complex life beyond these walls. Santos. Timothy raised his voice, this time with real authority. Table 12 has been calling for 5 minutes. Get back to work immediately. Andre nodded respectfully, but before moving away he made a quick sign to Mr. Ashford, who laughed sincerely for the first time all evening. Victoria observed the exchange with an expression that oscillated between curiosity and something dangerously close to remorse. What did he say? She asked her father. Mr. Ashford signed to her, but Victoria just looked at him without understanding, once again remembering her own limitation. Andre, who was a few meters away, translated without being asked. He said he's finally found someone who speaks his language. The following hours passed in a strange dance of evasion and observation. Victoria found herself following Andre with her gaze as he attended to other tables, noticing for the first time how he moved, not like someone servile, but with a quiet dignity she had never perceived. Each gesture was precise, each interaction with other customers respectful but firm. When Andre approached to refill their drinks, Victoria stopped him with a gesture. Can I ask you a personal question? Of course, ma'am. Why do you work here? I mean, she hesitated, trying to formulate the question without seeming condescending. It's obvious you have skills, education. Andre smiled, not with the professional smile he usually displayed, but with something more genuine and infinitely sadder. Sometimes life takes us to places we didn't plan to be. That doesn't answer my question. With all respect, Mrs. Ashford, some questions are more complicated than they seem. Timothy appeared again, this time with patience visibly exhausted. Santos, I need to speak with you now. Andre excused himself and followed the maître d'hôtel to a more secluded corner of the restaurant, where Timothy clearly believed he was out of customers' hearing range. But Andre had learned over 2 years serving Manhattan's elite that the rich rarely paid enough attention to lower their voices adequately. I don't know what game you're playing, Timothy hissed, but I suggest you stop immediately. Knowing sign language doesn't make you special. You're a waiter. Behave like one. I was just helping a customer who wasn't feeling well. You made a scene. You drew unnecessary attention. The Ashfords are important clients, and I don't need some random employee meddling in delicate family matters. Andre maintained a neutral expression, but something in his eyes changed. I understand your concern, Mr. Richardson. Excellent. Then keep your head down and do your job. And Santos, Timothy leaned closer to him, don't get any illusions thinking that being useful once changes anything about who you are or where you belong. As Timothy walked away, Andre remained motionless for a few seconds, processing the words. It wasn't the first time he'd heard variations of that same message. 2 years at Le Bernardin had been 2 years of constant reminders about his place in the social hierarchy. What Timothy and others like him didn't know was that Andre Santos had occupied very different spaces before finding himself serving wine to people who saw him as furniture. There was a time when his surname appeared in financial newspapers and specialized magazines, when young black professionals were called promising and visionaries in the same publications that now wouldn't even notice his existence. When he returned to the dining room, Andre found Victoria watching him with an intensity that surprised him. She had spent the last 20 minutes trying to communicate with her father through rudimentary gestures and exaggerated facial expressions, with visibly frustrating results for both. Could you, she began, then stopped, clearly struggling with her pride. Could you teach me some basic things so I can at least say hello and how are you without looking like an idiot? Andre looked at her for a long moment. Victoria Ashford, heiress to a fortune estimated at $8 billion, Stanford graduate and board member of 3 charitable organizations, was asking a waiter for help communicating with her own father. It would be my pleasure, Andre responded, and began teaching her the basic signs. During the next 20 minutes, something extraordinary happened in Le Bernardin's VIP dining room. Victoria Ashford, one of Manhattan's most powerful women, sat next to Andre Santos and watched his hands attentively as he taught her simple gestures. Miss Ashford watched with an increasingly broad smile as his daughter struggled to form her first words in his language. Like this? Victoria attempted to sign I'm sorry. Andre gently corrected the position of her hands. Like this. Try it more slowly. Other customers began to notice the unusual scene. Whispers spread through neighboring tables. Timothy watched from afar with an expression mixing horror and disbelief. His carefully maintained hierarchy was being systematically demolished by an impromptu sign language lesson. It was then that Victoria asked the question that would change everything. "Andre, do you have higher education?" Andre stopped in the middle of a demonstration. "Why?" "Because you teach better than my private tutors from Harvard, and they charged $300 an hour." The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. Victoria was beginning to realize there were layers to this man she had never suspected. Andre, for his part, felt the familiar weight of being evaluated, categorized, judged by people who believed a person could only exist in a single dimension. Each new question Victoria asked only strengthened something within Andre that had been growing silently during his 2 years of forced invisibility. A quiet determination that his true oppressors had not yet recognized, but would soon discover they had completely underestimated the depth of the man they had tried to reduce to a waiter's uniform. In the following days, Andre noticed subtle changes in Le Bernardin's atmosphere. Timothy had clearly spread his version of events among the staff, a narrative in which a waiter had taken advantage of a medical situation to show off to important clients. "Careful, don't become a star, Santos," commented Kevin, another waiter, with a malicious smile. "I hear you're giving sign language classes to millionaires. How about you teach the rest of us how to become private tutors too?" Andre continued polishing glasses, maintaining a neutral expression. 2 years of working there had taught him that reacting only added fuel to the fire. But internally something was changing. Each sarcastic comment, each condescending look, each attempt to belittle him only strengthened a determination that had been growing silently. "By the way," Kevin continued, clearly encouraged by Andre's apparent passivity, "Timothy is thinking of moving you to the morning shift. Breakfasts, less prestigious, fewer tips, more suitable for someone who doesn't know their place." It was then that a familiar voice interrupted the conversation. "Sorry to interrupt." Victoria Asford was standing at the entrance to the service area, something that had never happened in 2 years. The waiters stopped what they were doing. Timothy appeared instantly with that professional smile he reserved for VIP clients. "Mrs. Asford, what a surprise. Is there a problem we can resolve?" "Actually, yes." Victoria looked directly at Andre. "I need to speak with Andre privately." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin looked like he had swallowed his tongue. Timothy opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Of course. Timothy stammered. "Santos, you go with the lady." Victoria led Andre to a reserved table in a corner of the restaurant, away from curious gazes. "My father hasn't stopped talking about you since Thursday. He wants to get to know you better." She paused. "And it seems there's much more to you than a waiter who knows sign language." She paused, studying his face. "I've done some research." Andre felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of research?" Andre Santos, bachelor's degree in business administration from Columbia University, MBA from Wharton, former senior consultant at McKinsey & Company. Victoria enumerated each title like someone revealing cards in a poker game. Specialist in corporate restructuring for Fortune 500 corporations. The world around Andre seemed to slow down. 2 years of careful anonymity, of chosen invisibility, had just shattered in 30 seconds. "Something's missing from my research, Andre." She looked at him intently for a long moment, weighing his options. Victoria Asford wasn't just a wealthy client. She was the heiress to one of the country's most powerful business empires. If she wanted to destroy him, she could do it with a simple phone call. "Why?" Andre asked simply. "Because a man with your qualifications doesn't serve wine by chance. There's a story here and I want to know it." Andre looked around at the restaurant where he had hidden for 2 years. Timothy watched from afar, clearly trying to decipher what was happening. Kevin and the other waiters whispered among themselves, speculating about the impossible conversation they were witnessing. 3 years ago, I was the youngest consultant promoted to partner at McKinsey. I had clients moving billions, an apartment in Manhattan, a Porsche. Andre paused, perceiving the irony. "I thought I had arrived where I wanted to be." "What happened?" "I discovered that my main client, Meridian Industries, was using my restructuring recommendations to fire thousands of employees while diverting profits to offshore accounts. When I confronted the CEO, he offered me a share of the profits in exchange for my silence. Victoria leaned forward. You refused. I went to the SEC, the FBI, the press. I had evidence, recordings, documents. Andre laughed bitterly. What I didn't have was awareness of the real power I was up against. They systematically destroyed you. First, they falsified evidence, suggesting I was receiving bribes. Then they sued me for violating client-consultant confidentiality. They froze my assets during the investigation. When I finally proved my innocence 2 years later, I discovered I'd been placed on an informal blacklist. No consulting firm would hire me. Victoria listened in absolute silence, processing each word. I lost everything. My apartment, my car, my savings. And most importantly, I lost my reputation. Andre Santos, the promising young man who was going to be McKinsey's first black managing partner, became Andre Santos, the problematic consultant no one wanted anywhere near their companies. And you ended up here. I needed to work. I needed to eat. Timothy hired me because I had no references he could verify. So I lied and said I'd worked in restaurants during college. Andre looked directly into Victoria's eyes. For 2 years I pretended to be invisible. I served people who frequented the same circles that destroyed me, listening to comments about people like me knowing their place. Victoria remained silent for a long while. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me. And why? Andre hesitated, but then decided to be completely honest. Because something changed Thursday. Your father treated me like a human being, not like furniture. You treated me with respect. It had been a long time since I'd forgotten how that felt. Andre, do you have any idea who my father is? William Asford, founder of Asford Industries, one of the largest investment corporations in the United States. Victoria smiled for the first time since the conversation began. And do you know what the first major scandal my father investigated was when he took charge of the company's regulatory compliance division? Andre felt something shift in the atmosphere between them. No, Meridian Industries. He spent 2 years investigating their fraudulent restructuring practices. He could never prove anything because someone at the company had tipped him off about the investigation. Victoria leaned closer to him, but he always suspected there was an honest consultant somewhere who had tried to report the fraud and been silenced. Andre's heart began to beat faster. My father has been looking for that consultant for 3 years. He wanted to offer him a position in our company, compensation for damages suffered, and most importantly, the opportunity to finish what he'd started. Andre looked at Victoria as if she were speaking a language he didn't fully understand. Why? Because Asford Industries doesn't just investigate fraud, it destroys it completely. And because my father believes people with integrity are the most valuable asset a company can have. On the other side of the restaurant, Timothy watched with growing unease. Something about that prolonged conversation between one of his most important clients and his problematic waiter deeply bothered him. Andre, Victoria said softly, what would you say if I offered you the opportunity not just to rebuild your career, but to finally get justice against the people who tried to destroy you? For the first time in 2 years, Andre felt something he had learned to completely repress, hope. But more than that, he felt the awakening of a determination that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. As Timothy approached their table nervously, clearly worried about the direction the conversation was taking, Andre realized his long-forced lethargy was coming to an end. The same circles of power that had destroyed him were about to discover that Andre Santos had not only survived, but had used every moment of humiliation to prepare for a comeback that would completely redefine the rules of the game. The real question was no longer whether he would accept Victoria's offer, but whether those who had underestimated him were prepared for the consequences of having awakened a man who now had access to resources that made their former powers insignificant before the storm that was coming. 24 hours, Victoria said, looking at her Cartier watch. That's the time you have to decide if you accept the position of Director of Compliance and Investigations at Asford Industries. Starting salary of $400,000, profit sharing and unlimited resources to investigate and prosecute corporate fraud. Andre looked around Le Bernardin one last time as an employee. Timothy watched from afar, clearly agitated by the prolonged conversation. Kevin and the other waiters whispered increasingly fantastic theories about what was happening. There's only one condition, Victoria continued with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father insists that your first case be a complete investigation of this company's labor practices. Andre's blood ran cold. Victoria, last week we received 3 anonymous complaints at our legal department. Racial discrimination, workplace harassment, violation of federal labor laws. She opened a discreet folder. Coincidentally, all specifically mention the behavior of a maitre d' named Timothy Richardson. On the other side of the dining room, Timothy finally lost his patience and approached the table. I apologize for the interruption, Mrs. Ashford, but Santos has responsibilities to fulfill. Victoria looked at Timothy with the cold expression she reserved for people she considered insignificant. Actually, Mr. Richardson, Andre no longer has responsibilities here. He's just accepted an executive position at my company. Timothy's face went through several shades of red. Executive position? This man is a waiter. This man, Andre said, rising slowly, is Andre Santos, former senior consultant at McKinsey & Company, MBA from Wharton, specialist in corporate restructuring and fraud detection. The silence that followed was absolute. Kevin, who was serving wine at the next table, almost spilled the bottle. The other employees completely stopped their activities. For 2 years, Andre continued, with a voice that recovered the natural authority he had been forced to repress, I systematically observed this company's labor violations. I've documented every discriminatory comment, every illegal practice, every abuse of power. Timothy stammered. That's impossible. I was hired without references because I was systematically prevented from working in my field through a defamation campaign orchestrated by corrupt companies, Andre explained calmly. But I had plenty of time to observe and learn. Victoria opened her laptop. Andre, would you like to review some of the evidence we've collected? The screen showed photographs, documents, and audio recordings. Timothy paled, recognizing his own voice, making comments about people like Andre knowing their place. Kevin appeared in a video making racist imitations when he thought no one was watching. Where did you get this? Timothy whispered. From the internal security system. Victoria replied matter-of-factly. Ashford Industries acquired the majority of shares in this establishment last week. Part of our due diligence process includes complete review of all security recordings from the last 24. Andre felt a deep satisfaction seeing Timothy process the information. You bought us. Actually, the acquisition was Andre's suggestion. Victoria lied smoothly. After he mentioned the irregularities he observed working here, my father decided it would be interesting to investigate more thoroughly. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Victoria had bought the restaurant in a 15-minute phone call that morning, specifically to give Andre the pleasure of confronting his former oppressors with real power in his hands. Mr. Richardson, Andre said, removing his waiter's apron and placing it carefully on the table, as the new director of regulatory compliance for the company that owns this establishment, I have some questions about your management practices. Timothy looked around desperately, as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. The other employees crowded around, some surprised, others clearly terrified about what this meant for their own jobs. First question, Andre continued, taking out his phone. Can you explain this email you sent to corporate administration 6 months ago, recommending that waiters of certain backgrounds be kept away from VIP clients? Timothy opened and closed his mouth like a fish. Andre showed the screen. Here it is, with your digital signature sent from your corporate email. Second question. Victoria interrupted, clearly amused. How do you explain the fact that black employees at this establishment receive on average 40% less in tips than white employees, despite being systematically assigned to the least lucrative sections? That's systematic discrimination, Andre completed. Documented in spreadsheets that you yourself maintain to optimize staff distribution. Kevin tried to move away discreetly, but Victoria stopped him with a gesture. Mr. Morrison, don't leave. I have some interesting audio recordings I'd like to discuss with you. What followed were 15 minutes of methodical and complete humiliation. Every racist comment, every discriminatory joke, Every abuse of power from the last 2 years was presented with irrefutable evidence. Timothy and Kevin alternated between desperate denial and pathetic attempts to justify their actions. "You've got it all wrong," Timothy finally pleaded. "It was never about race." Andre simply didn't fit the clientele profile. Andre laughed. Not with the forced, deferential laugh he had feigned for 2 years, but with a genuine laugh full of irony. Clientele profile. Interesting choice of words for a man who is now being held accountable by the same man you believed didn't fit. "Please," Timothy whispered. "I have a family, a mortgage, and I had a career, a reputation, a life," Andre responded calmly. "But I've learned something important in the last 2 years. The real difference between us isn't skin color or social origin. It's character." Victoria closed the laptop. "Mr. Richardson, your dismissal will be effective immediately. Human Resources will contact you about the transition process and pending legal matters." As Timothy left the room with hunched shoulders, defeated, Andre observed the other employees. Some seemed genuinely shocked by the revelations. Others had clearly been silent accomplices. For the employees who remain, Andre announced, his voice resonating in the now silent room, there will be significant changes in personnel policies, starting with mandatory diversity and inclusion training. Maria, one of the few employees who had always treated Andre with respect, approached timidly. "Mr. Santos, does this mean you're going to run the restaurant now?" Andre looked at Victoria, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Among other responsibilities, yes. But my main goal will be to ensure this establishment becomes an example of how to treat employees with dignity and respect." As the news spread through the restaurant, Andre observed the various reactions. Some employees seemed relieved, people like Maria, who had witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to report it. Others, accomplices of the previous system, were clearly calculating their chances of survival in the new regime. "There's one last thing," Victoria said, pulling out a final folder. "Andre, what do you think about testifying in federal workplace discrimination cases?" "Why?" "Because your former employer, Meridian Industries, has just been indicted by the FBI. Apparently, your original investigation provided crucial leads that allowed them to build a solid case." She smiled. "My father thought you'd like to know that your bravery from 3 years ago is finally bearing fruit." Andre felt something complete inside his chest. The circle was closing. The people who had tried to destroy him for doing the right thing were finally facing the consequences. And he was no longer alone in the fight. As the last employees absorbed the new reality and Victoria organized her documents, Andre looked around at the dining room where he had spent 2 years feeling invisible. Power had changed hands so quickly, it still seemed surreal. But the real transformation wasn't just in the change of ownership or Timothy's fall. It was in the growing perception that Andre Santos, the man they had underestimated, belittled and tried to destroy, had not only survived but had emerged with resources that completely transformed the rules of the game they thought they were playing. 6 months later, Andre sat in his office on the 47th floor of Asford Tower, reviewing quarterly reports showing impressive figures. His regulatory compliance division had identified corporate fraud totaling $2.3 billion, resulting in 47 successful federal prosecutions. Le Bernardin, now renamed Santos & Co., had become Manhattan's first fine dining restaurant, certified as an exemplary work environment by the Department of Labor. Maria, promoted to general manager, coordinated a diverse team where tips were distributed equitably and respect was mandatory policy. Timothy Richardson had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for systematic workplace discrimination. Kevin now worked at a fast food restaurant in Queens, after no respectable restaurant wanted to hire him following the scandal's viralization on social media. Dad always said that a person's true character isn't recognized by what they do when they have power, but by what they do when they believe they don't. Victoria commented during a celebratory lunch. Andre smiled as he looked out the window at the city where he had been invisible for so long. The best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something bigger than they could ever imagine. Mr. Asford, now his mentor and father figure, signed proudly, "You've taught us that true leadership doesn't come from titles or money, but from integrity." Andre had learned that sometimes you have to traverse deep valleys to discover mountains you didn't even know existed within us. Each humiliation had been an investment in his own strength. And have you discovered yet that your apparent defeats can be just preparation for unimaginable victories? Subscribe to the channel to see more stories that prove that whoever underestimates people with integrity always pays the price of their own arrogance.